that song. Today's reading is by Nishant Ahmad, If My Son Were Gay. If my son were gay, I'd slap him with a nice high five. Because coming out to your dad takes balls that most men don't have. If my son were gay, I'd beat the hell out of him. Because he said he was better than me at Super Smash. He basically was asking for me to kick his butt. If my son were gay, I would kick him out of the house. Because why waste June on video games when there are sports to be played? And just because he likes making out with boys doesn't mean he can't tackle the heck out of them too. If my son were gay, I'd call him a douche. But only because this morning he ate the last peanut butter cup in the house. The jerk knows they're my favorite. If my son were gay, I'd still give him the talk. I just wouldn't have to worry about a baby in 9 months. If my son were gay, I'd make fun of what he wears. Because, damn son, those heels don't go with that dress. If my son were gay, I'd tell him to be proud. Because you're human, no matter the gender, on the other side of your mouth. If my son were gay, nothing would be different at all. Except that 20 years down the line, I'll be expecting a handsome son-in-law.
When I was little, I remember when my grandmother got married. This was her third marriage. This seems odd, but it's quite literally one of the first memories I had as a child. I was about 2 years old. I remember all the ladies fussing around and getting ready, curling irons, hairpins, that whole shebang. And me wandering about with a bag of pretzels bigger than I was, trying to get into every picture. I remember the wedding cake and wanting to play with the little dolls at the top of that cake, when Grandma was done, of course, because then it would be my turn. I remember telling my mother that I wanted to get married too. My mom told me when I got older, she hoped I would. Now flash forward a couple of years. I was about 4 years old and I was in a Catholic preschool. My mother enrolled me in to kind of keep an eye on me while she was at work. We were playing wedding. And I remember I was the groom and I was the priest, but when it got to be my turn to be the bride, I was told that this was impossible. When I asked the instructor, Sister Bernice, why, she told me that brides could be grooms and priests, but they could never be brides. I said that wasn't fair, and suddenly I just wasn't interested in playing wedding anymore. My mother was asked to take me home and told that I would not be welcome back because I was a disturbing influence to the other students because I was unnatural. My mother was ashamed and not afraid to tell me so. I told her in the car on the way home I didn't really want to be a bride because dresses were cool, but I didn't like them all the time. But I wanted to marry a boy because I didn't like girls. She promptly smacked me upside the head and told me that would never happen ever. Comedian Ahmed Baroka summed up the gay marriage debate quite nicely using a wonderful metaphor. He said that gay marriage was like going to a restaurant and saying, waiter, I'll have the cake. And then the guy at the table next to you was like, waiter, cancel that cake. I don't want anyone to have cake. God hates cakes. My kids are here. If they see you eating cake, they're going to want to have cake too. You can go home and eat cake in private. But we prefer that you didn't call it cake. Maybe a civil muffin. The funny thing that is cake, and by cake I do mean marriage, has been enjoyed by gay men for centuries before a book called the Bible was circulated and dominated the dominant Western religion became Christianity. William Estridge suggests that evidence exists that same-sex marriages were tolerated in parts of Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Artifacts from Egypt, for example, show that same-sex relationships not only existed, but the discovery of a pharaonic tomb for such a couple shows that their union was recognized by the kingdom. In actuality, same-sex marriage practices and rituals were less known in Egypt compared to Mesopotamia, where documents existed for a variety of marital practices, including male lovers of kings and polyamory. None of the recorded laws of Mesopotamia, including the Code of Hammurabi, contained restrictions against same-sex unions, despite the fact that marriages were otherwise very well regulated. Brent Pickett's paper, Homosexuality, notes that classical antiquity in the Western world is frequently cited for examples of same-sex love and relationships. Those separate concepts of homosexuality and heterosexuality didn't really exist the way that we see them today. Plato's Symposium, for example, describes instances of homosexual attraction and same-sex attraction in ancient Greece without condemnation. Some point to examples of same-sex interaction in Greek artwork as further evidence of this equal status within the society. Individual higher statuses, however, was critical of the importance of the free expression of love. Status enabled older men beginning in their 20s and 30s to act as a mentor to a younger male who had not yet reached adulthood. The relationship consisted of a standardized courtship ritual and the basic belief that male attraction to other men was typically considered a sign of masculinity. Same-sex unions were known to have occurred in addition to opposite-sex marriages, existing simultaneously as an educational union available to both teacher and pupil for both men and women outside of their heterosexual arrangement. Such beliefs were not universal in ancient Greece, though, however, some states disapproved of the rituals and relationships. I believe one of them was Sparta. Roman social customs are relatively well known, and same-sex unions existed high in society amongst Roman emperors. Roman statesman Cicero also documented the legal rights of an individual within a same-sex marriage. Female same-sex unions seem to have been less common, but only because women enjoyed less freedom in their economic and social endeavors. Over time, Rome experienced a similar trajectory as Greece in the early Republic and later Empire, and the negative attitude toward same-sex unions and non-procreative sexuality increased with the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, according to Pickett. By the 4th century, anxiety toward obviously pervasive same-sex unions reached a peak when the state passed a law promising punishment to anyone entering a same-sex marriage. The rise of Christianity and the dominance of the church in medieval Europe was largely detrimental for same-sex marriages, of course. There is some evidence that same-sex relationships enjoyed relative freedom through the early Middle Ages. European secular law had few recorded limitations on same-sex behavior, and there is even evidence in the literature for the clergy of compassion for homosexuality, notably within the clergy itself. The church seemed to be tolerant of same-sex unions in practice and made some provisions for ceremonies commemorating the companionate brotherhood. John Boswell's Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality documents homosexual marriages performed by gay clerics dating back to the 4th century. While the Roman Church was punishing those entering same-sex unions, the Greek Church still made provisions for them quite a while afterwards, ultimately stopping somewhere after 425 ACE. Attitudes toward homosexuality as a problem continued with laws passed against buggery and sodomy throughout Europe. The character that I play at Renaissance fairs was a famous example of this. King Henri III of France was well noted to not only be bisexual, but also a transvestite who married his male lover to his wife's sister in order to keep up appearances. Although, man wore a dress, I don't know if there were any appearances to keep up. It has also been theorized by historian A.L. Rouse that King James I of England was also homosexual. From his own mouth, the king was to refer to women as the pejorative female dogs, you guys know what that word is, capable of only one good thing, breeding. Most women were socially unwelcome at court, including his wife, Queen Anne. He, like Henri III, filled his court with pretty youth and raised a commoner to the position of Duke of Buckingham. The Duke and the King wrote many surviving letters to one another, calling each other husband and wife. It has been thought that the harshness of the King James Version of the Bible was born out of the sheer hatred and exasperation of the Anglican clergy that they were having with their bon vivant monarch. They didn't know how to deal with him otherwise. The 19th century is when the term homosexuality was coined by Carolee Maria Gerbeni. He postulated that homosexuality was one of the 4 types of inbred sexuality and should be considered natural. He also posited that since it was natural, it was a violation of human rights to treat homosexuality as different or wrong. He was in the minority, because most Victorians believed that the only natural means of sexual activity was procreation. and anything past that was deviant and unnatural behavior. That's a whole other sermon, though. Homosexuality was regarded as a perversion well into the 20th century, and the standard cure was electroshock therapy. And if that didn't work, lobotomization was considered. In the 1960s, a sexual revolution throughout the country took hold. We're talking here in America. And hundreds of years of frustration and degradation came to a head with the Stonewall riots that I talked about earlier. In New York, a law was passed that stated a man must dress like a man and could not engage in intimate activity with another man in public, no matter where. This included even touching one another. The police raided the Stonewall Inn in 1969 with the intention of making arrests under this new law. Gay men, led by a contingent of drag queens and transgender individuals, rioted over a period of several days, saying that they were tired of the oppression that had been thrust upon them and that they were experiencing. This was the birth of the modern gay rights movement, which started as an alternative sexual revolution originally, but became more and more mainstream in the latter part of the 90s, after the height of the AIDS crisis and the removal of homosexuality from the DSM-IV, which was the leading diagnostic manual for mental health professionals. Over several years, this saw a drastic change in public perception of gays in the media as sexually promiscuous and deviant, as in the movie Cruising, to the AIDS victims, as in the film Philadelphia, to the gay best friend, as we saw in the films My Best Friend's Wedding, or in television shows like Will and Grace and Sex and the City. In the late 2000s, the Human Rights Campaign drastically changed gears. Instead of making gay marriage about rights, it made it about love. People saw us now just like them, living life, bringing normal in most cases, but denied one thing: marriage. I once had a conversation with Archbishop Bernard Price, who oversaw the Greater Antelope Valley and Central Valleys as part of the Mortoma Church of Antioch, or Orthodox Catholics. He shared many stories with me why their church would bless a same-sex union, but not a heterosexual one. I thought that was really odd. The matter was simple. Gay unions got nothing. No political prowess, no rights under law. Their unions were strictly about love and sharing a life together. Whereas heterosexual unions were designed to have protection under the law. They were acknowledged by the government. They were in the tax code. And he jokingly added that even their auto insurance was cheaper. On June 26, 2013, the Supreme Court of the United States dealt a crushing blow to the opponents or the proponents of Proposition 8. The Supreme Court issued a 5-4 decision. Chief Justice Roberts wrote for the majority and was joined by Justices Ginsburg, Kagan, Breyer, and Scalia. Justices Kennedy, Sotomayor, Alito, and Thomas were in the minority. The court found that the proponents did not have the standing to appeal in federal court. To have standing, they must have suffered an injury in fact, thus giving them a sufficiently concrete interest in the outcome of the issue in dispute. Because no injury had been shown, the appeal to the Ninth Circuit should have been dismissed for lack of jurisdiction. This only applied to the Ninth Circuit and the Supreme Court cases, the California Supreme Court cases. The court returned the case to the Ninth Circuit with the instructions to dismiss the appeal. This left the district's court ruling overturning Proposition 8 as the final ruling in the case. Because the appeal was decided on the question of standing, the Supreme Court did not examine or rule whether or not the view that Proposition 8 had violated the U.S. Constitution, specifically the Equal Protection Clause. So what does this all mean? Well, ultimately, it means that many of us who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transsexual have a right to marry a partner of the same sex. But we do not have the Supreme Court to thank for this decision, because ultimately it was made by U.S. District Chief Judge Vaughn Walker, who stated that it was unconstitutional to the Due Process Clause because no compelling state interest justifies denying same-sex couples the fundamental right to marry. His court also determined that Proposition 8 violated the Equal Protection Clause because there is no rational basis for limiting the designation of marriage to opposite-sex couples. Now, this was all started under Schwarzenegger, of course, while now Governor Jerry Brown was in office, and he refused to hear any more argument on it. He didn't support it to begin with. So he chose not to fight the ruling made by Judge Walker. The proponents came forth and argued that they should be able to continue that fight, so the California Supreme Court sided with the proponents of Proposition 8, and thus the case went to the Supreme Court of the United States, leading to the results I already mentioned above. Now, there are several disturbing facts about this case. The first is that we, meaning the LGBTQ community, did not win because it was a violation of our civil rights, but rather we won because of a legal error in our favor. The second was the sheer amount of lies and propaganda that went into this campaign, funded mostly on their side by the Catholic and Mormon churches, with the Mormon church providing 80 to 90% of door-to-door solicitations. Third was that this ballot initiative was the hardest and most expensive piece of legislative campaigns to ever be waged outside of a presidential election, with both sides receiving close to 30% of their funding from out-of-state sources, including other countries. We're talking $40 million apiece, give or take a few million. The UU Church stood by the LGBT community, offering support and guidance for all involved to their own detriment. My sister lives in the Central Valley, which is like the Bible Belt of California. It's worse than Orange County, believe it or not. She witnessed a massive increase in the amount of violence in the area after Prop 8 passed for both supporters and opponents. She herself received threatening phone calls for months afterwards because she volunteered in a UU phone bank at the Clovis Church. No on 8 signs at the Clovis Unitarian Universalist Church were torn up, with Reverend Brian Jessup alleging that his church experienced vandalism every single night. Around this time, the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church in Knoxville experienced a massive shooting in 2008. It was targeted because they were welcoming to the LGBTQ community and had a liberal stance on many issues, including Proposition 8. The Knoxville community responded with an outpouring of love that inspired the leadership of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the UUA, to launch the Stand by the Side of Love campaign in 2009, with the goal of harnessing love's power to challenge exclusion, oppression, and violence based on sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, race, religion, or any other identity. I believe that it was a combination of the Standing on the Side of Love and the HRC's About Face that finally sold the idea of marriage to the greater public. I thought the fight was lost for at least my generation. The quote that I used in this week's email blast really spoke to me. That's why I chose it. If you recall, it was by Gail Collins. She was a journalist and the first female editor of the New York Times editorial page. She said, "Gay rights is just a matter of time. Look at polls. Worrying about gay marriage, let alone gay civil unions or gay employment rights, is a middle-aged issue. Young people just can't see it as a problem. At worst, the gays are going to win this one by waiting until the opposition dies off." I saw evidence of this firsthand on the night that Prop 8 was overturned. My fiance Renee, back there, who's filming this for me, was beyond thrilled, and given what he went through in the military, I can't blame him in the slightest. He wanted to go out and celebrate, so we did. We dressed to the nines and went to the LGBT night at the House of Blues called Club Lucky. Much to our chagrin, no one was celebrating. People were just being people. And he was extraordinarily disappointed. Do they know what we went through? What I went through to get here, babe? He asked me. I answered just as angrily. I don't think that they do. I don't think that any of them even looked at the news today. My own son, he's 15, was completely clueless as to why people would treat others differently because of their age, race, or sexual orientation. His response was, "Aren't we all human? Didn't we all come from the same eggs?" You can tell my child's a Darwinist. Most of the younger generation doesn't see a problem with gay relationships, and there's evidence that sexuality is much more fluid than we thought. And perhaps we're returning to that concept, the one that the Greeks embraced so many millennia ago. So what does it mean to be married? Well, it means that I can now have medical benefits with my partner and have them taken out before taxes, not after. It means that we can establish credit together. We can purchase a home and car together. We can adopt easier and have children of our own without fear of repercussions, like them being taken away from us because we're gay. If something happens, we can visit one another in the hospital and not have to worry about lying that we're family. If either one of us dies, we'll inherit the other's property as a surviving spouse without having to go through all the legal paperwork that was necessary before. No family member can come in and take those things from us, as has happened so many times in the past. I also qualify for veterans benefits under his plan as a military spouse. Oh, and I checked, we do get a discount on car insurance. I worry about legislation that is pending in several states that deny people like me basic rights, like Sean spoke of earlier. I see this legislation as a repeat in history. In 1960, when the first interracial marriages were allowed, they were considered unnatural. More legislation in the form of Jim Crow laws were slapped on the books to control this onslaught to traditional marriage. The same thing is happening now, and I can only hope that we have learned from our past mistakes. And we kind of fear that we haven't. Time marches on, and this is what it means to stand on the side of love. We need to be in those marches, fighting this fight, because ultimately we are all humans, and we all deserve love. So what now? After 1,000 years of repression and opposition, we can marry. I, in fact, intend to do this in this very church in 2 weeks. 13 days and counting. We've designed a gorgeous ceremony with all the trappings of a modern wedding, and I've decided I'm going to carry a bouquet and wear a garter. Because, well, out of the two of us, I'm the bride, I suppose. Not because of any other reason other than the fact that I'm the primary planner and executioner of the whole shebang. Although part of me wishes to go back and tell Sister Bernice from that preschool long ago, ha! Look who's the bride now. Stuff that in your hat. Who's to say what is traditional and when a tradition has been denied to you for centuries? My mother, incidentally, has paid for the champagne toast. So her attitude has changed a bit. Oh, and there will be a cake, not a civil muffin. A lovely 4-tier confection of blue velvet with Bavarian cream and dark chocolate with fresh strawberries, roasted or frosted, not roasted, with buttercream frosting. There will be fleur-de-lis and peacock feathers and 2 Disney princes, Eric and Philip, on top representing me and my love. Sorry, Renee, but you said I could. My ancestor, Marie Antoinette, had a terrible misquote attributed to her, but I think it still fits here. Let them eat cake. I will, my dear Marie, and it will taste that much sweeter.